right. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm Minik, and I am going to talk about Greenlandic rock flour from stones to bread. And if this works, which it might, you can see here who we are thanking for the funding. Let's start with this object. I'm a geologist. This is what I work on. This is called planet Earth. And as you can tell from this image, it is a beautiful place. It consists of many different things, and they all act together in harmony. Almost all of them anyway. We have the ocean, we have the land, we can see some plants, and we can see clouds, whatever. This has existed for 4.5 billion years, more than 4.5 billion years, and everything has been working as it always has, and in harmony, as I said. But about 500,000 years ago, a new species arrived on the planet, that is us, humans of some kind, and they had a new idea that had never been exploited by anybody before in the whole universe, as far as we know. They understood how to tame fire, and mankind started to outsource everything that is to do with work or digestion or everything that takes up the slightest amount of work and bother. We outsource that to fossil energy. We take branches from trees, burn them, oil, whatever, everything we can get a hand of, we put a match to and to convert the heat into work and let it do the job for us. And that worked really well for a very long period of time. But at some point in time, it started to not work quite so well anymore because it turned out that it changed the way the planet works. And one of the things, I know this will come as a surprise to all of you, but actually it has started to change the climate on Earth. And I tell you this, and I know, again, this is troublesome news, but it is news anyway. It has started to change the planet. The Earth is getting warmer and warmer, and in Greenland, my home country, you see that everywhere, basically. You see the glaciers are melting. Here we see a wall of ice. You can see the little helicopter there, and this wall maybe is, God knows, less than 100 meters tall, but the ice continues underneath the sea surface, so the whole wall is about 1,000 meters high of ice coming out. The length of this front is 15 kilometers, and within a few years, it has receded 15 kilometers in one direction back towards the ice cap where it came from. So everywhere we see this. Of course, that is troublesome, and can we do something about it? We'll try to find out. Another thing, another big issue these days is, of course, that we're already 7 billion people on Earth, and every of these 7 billion people are multiplying and produce more people. And that means that we are under great stress to feed all these people, and this is accentuated by the climate change and many other things, but also by the fact that many parts of the tropics of the world look something like this, very infertile. It has been known for a long time that the tropics are actually not very fertile places because it has been warm and humid for a long period of time, so warm rain has been drizzling through all the soil and dissolving all the nutrients and taking them out into the ocean and letting them basically left behind just infertile soils. So maybe we should do something about that as well. So let's try to use a powerful tool of science to see if we can do something about some of these problems and maybe even have some benefits to ourselves from dealing with it. So I'll again present the Earth that you saw before, but this is a different kind of presentation. This is a satellite image or a number of satellite images, and the colors represent where there's chlorophyll, that is the green stuff in plants and algae and bacteria, whatever, that converts solar energy into basically biomass, into biologic energy. And the colors are such that the green areas are, well, this might not work very well. Anyway, the green colors are areas where there is a lot of productivity, whereas the areas that are like blue here, that's ocean where there's hardly any productivity. So if you've seen all these wonderful movies that show tropical waters full of colorful fishes and all kind of life, they actually may be correct for very small spots, but most of the tropical seas are extreme. They're marine deserts. Nothing lives there. And why does it not live there? Because there are no nutrients anymore. In contrast, we see Greenland up here, the most wonderful place on Earth. And you see around Greenland, there's an enormous productivity in the ocean. And that productivity, to some extent anyway, is sustained from the fact that there's a lot of nutrients in the ocean. And where does that come from? Well, we have to try to get into that topic as well. And that's where I'll take you, because that is part of the story, and is part of the part of the inspiration for doing the research that we are using all this tons of money that we just heard about in the introduction to solve some of these scientific questions. So this is one part of the inspiration. Another thing that is quite interesting is that I know this is another disturbing piece of news that you never have thought of before, but actually wealth is not evenly distributed on Earth. Some parts of Earth are richer than other parts of Earth. And in the richest part of Earth, like Denmark, we tend to believe that the reason why we are so rich is because we are smarter than people are most. But it turns out that the reason why we are richer is that the soil under our feet is better than the soil in countries where people are poor. And we can actually get a map, again, a satellite image, where we have here in the yellow colors. The intensity of the yellow color shows where crops grow, where you get some plants to grow on your fields and where you can harvest a lot of stuff. It turns out that something like 80% of the crop production on Earth comes from only 12 countries. And all the rest of them, they can work as hard as they like, and they can't produce much anyway. And that's because the soil where they live is poor and is depleted of nutrients. And if you look at the places where people are rich and have a high productivity in the soils, it turns out that most of it is in kind of a belt that is running across the northern hemisphere of Earth through, luckily, little Denmark, northern Europe, North America, part of USA and Canada, and some places in Asia here and there, for instance, along the Himalayas or over here in this part of Asia. If we think about the picture we saw before from the ocean, where we have the large clump of ice in Greenland and we have all the nutrients in the sea around it. And what we see here is we go 10,000 years back, we had an ice age in global ice age, and the glaciers, the ice sheets of the northern hemisphere were actually covering all that's north of the yellow belt. And the yellow belt seems to be the place where there is a lot of nutrients in the soil, and that's along the margin of the ice where it was 10,000 years ago. So maybe our wealth today is basically caused by the fact that we have the ice age 10,000 years ago, and we are now living, luckily, at the margin of this ice field at that time. This is very much light coming in, disturbing my beautiful slide. It's very irritating and annoying. But anyway, never mind the audience, let's think of the camera. But this is another presentation of Earth. I feel somehow that somebody is interfering with the lecture over here, but leave that. So we have here, again, the Earth satellite image. The other one was during the day. This is during the night, and at cocktail hours. And again, you can see that there is an uneven distribution of light on Earth, and that distribution of light is basically tracing where there's geologic activity or where the ice field had been before. Again, we have the margin of the ice here with the light, but also you can see through the Caribbean, part of South America, that's where there's geologic activity. So geology seemed to basically support productivity in the various parts of the Earth system. So, what could the reason possibly be? Oops. Well, as I told before, the Earth is getting warmer and the ice in Greenland is melting. But actually, the ice in Greenland has always been melting. It's just going much faster now than it was before, but the nature of an ice sheet or a glacier is that it builds by snow falling on the high parts. The snow turns into ice, loads the ice, and since it's plastic, it starts moving across the country. And as it moves across the country, it starts to abrade the rocks underneath and turn it into a powder. So it basically just crushes the rocks underneath the moving ice. When the ice comes from the center out towards the margin, out at the coast, where it's at a low elevation, it starts to melt. And the meltwater that comes out from the ice is not like clear water you get out of the tap here, but it is this white milky water. Some people call it glacial milk. So it's just a white suspension of very, very fine rock dust. So this is happening now. It has been happening for the past many, many thousand years in Greenland. It is a feature that is associated with having this ice cap in Greenland. So what happens when it comes out towards the sea? This was a beautiful picture in very nice colors. Unfortunately, you can't enjoy that. But anyway, It was a nice picture. I took it myself. And here, as you see, the meltwater from the ice is coming out and dumping all this fine stuff along the along the delta here, and filling the fjord up with, again, this very, very fine mud. And here's another river. You can see enormous deposits of mud. Everywhere you go in Greenland, there's heaps and heaps and heaps of this mud. And for all time that people have been living in Greenland, this mud has served absolutely no purpose. It's really, really irritating. And I always found it very irritating. But the point where I not only found it irritating, but actually not fun at all, was when I nearly lost my daughter. She had the not so very good idea to wade into this mud, and she got stuck. We had to have like 10 grown men to haul her out of this mud again, and we never got her rubber boot out. One of them we got, the other is lost forever. And that kind of made it. I said, enough is enough. We have to figure out, can we use this mud for something? There must be something, so it cannot only be annoying. So what, as a scientist, do you do if you get the idea that you need to research something and figure out what is happening? Well, you do science. And we all know this is what scientists look like, and this is how we usually work. You even see some of them up in the bar. They don't have the face mask, but otherwise it's the same cast of characters. But this is what science usually look like, and I tell you, science like that is really boring. It's very, 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 very sterile and everything else. So when we do science in the geosciences, it looks like this. This is much more fun. You go out, play in mud with big shovels, rubber boats, outboard engines, shotguns, whatever. And you can roll around in the mud, and you can do everything you like. That is fun. And so this is our research method compared to what you saw before from the clean lab that less fun people are using for their science. And not only do you get to do that, then you have to take it back to the lab. And what does the lab look like? Like this. Can you imagine run, and then you can. So this is our kind of research, and a field that I really regret I didn't discover earlier in my career. But anyway, this is how we do it. So we started taking this mud apart and tried to figure out how does it work? Does it work for anything? And the idea being that we've seen in the ocean, it fertilizes what grows in the ocean. Also, we've seen that kind of from circumstantial evidence that where the glacier has been on Earth a few thousand years ago, that's where all the plants grow today. So could there be a link between this stuff and the growth of the plants? And theoretically, we would say, of course, there's got to be a link, because what this stuff is very, very fine crushed rocks. When you crush something to a very fine powder, it becomes very reactive, because it gets enormous surface area that plant roots or fungi or whatever can attack these mineral grains and get to all the good stuff that's in the minerals. So you have a big block like this, it would have maybe a surface area of God knows very little, and you can only get to this very limited surface. But if you crush it down to a very fine powder, it has almost infinite surface area that allows everything to attack these. So this is what this is. It's crushed rocks and contains all the nutrients that plants are designed from nature to feed from. So that is what we kind of suspected. And later, Andreas is going to give you some of the results, because he's a real scientist who knows how to take this project apart. I only get to run this machine and go out and look at the deposits. And here's one typical deposit from Greenland. Again, you can see an enormous cliff. You see a little person over here. And I have been cheating a little bit because she's Japanese. So it's only half as big as you think it is. But still, it is a very large deposit, and you can find them everywhere in Greenland. And again, this is just this very, very fine stuff. You look at it on closer count, and you can see it's here's just mud cracks and dried surface of it again, and it's so fine that if you try to touch it, you can't feel any grains or anything. It's like like a hand lotion or something. The mud. So it's completely without any large grains. Under the electron microscope, it looks something like this. It's like nothing. You see 20 microns here. It's like a woolen sock or something. But what it means is that all these particles are incredibly small. And we have tried to look at the particle size. And it turns out that most of the particles are maybe 2 or 3 thousandths of a millimeter on the longest direction of the grain. And some of them are down to nanometers. That is, very, 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 very small particles. So that again means that they are very reactive. We also looked at minerals in it, and it turns out that these are all the normal minerals you will find in the normal rock, like a granite in Greenland. And they have not been subjected to any loss of nutrients. They're just mechanically crushed. So what our research is about is to establish what is this material, how does it work, how much is there of it, can we get any idea about the effect on plants, how long will it work, if it actually does work. All these were questions that were kind of pestering us until we started looking for, from the geological side of this project, to look for some plant scientists who could help us, agronomists who could help us actually say something about this. And that is what Andreas is going to talk about, while we have been looking at the mechanical and physical and whatever properties of this. We also tried to look at how much meltwater is coming out of the Greenland ice cap as it melts, and how much of this rock flour does it carry, because of course if it actually works, it'll be really sad if there's only enough to use for half a year and then it's all over. So the idea being that by looking at how much is in every river that comes out, how much material is carried in suspension in the water, and can we put all this together to an estimate of how much comes out, it turns out that every year there's 1 billion tons extra of this material coming out and being put right at the doorstep of where you might take a ship in, for instance, to take it to somewhere in the world. So if we now try to sum up what the idea is based on, that the idea being that in the tropics, subtropics, all these places, they have malnutrition, maybe undernutrition, poverty, all kind of problems, and they all stem from one particular thing, that is the soil, the bad soil. And the soil is bad because the nutrients have been lost through hundreds of millions of years of warm tropical weather. While in Greenland, it's cold Arctic climate, this material is being produced continuously by ice cap, by the glaciers, just put out on the coast, ready to be shipped somewhere, and it doesn't require any processing, any chemical processing, physical, anything. It's a nature-made product, just ready to go. Greenland needs new businesses to thrive. So Greenland has a problem, they need something to sell. The tropics have a problem, they need something to make their soils fertile. So if we can merge these two problems and turn them into one solution, that is what our project is about. See, one thing that should be also addressed, aside from just the physical and chemical properties of this, is of course another big question, since we have been talking climate. We all know that climate comes from the global warming comes from increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So are we not just making this problem even worse if we start moving tons and millions of tons, hundreds of millions of tons, thousands of millions of tons of this material from Greenland to the tropics in big ships, with big diesel engines, whatever? Well, here comes a good part of the story, because you can, from the composition of this material, you can find out what is it made from and so forth, and you can say what happens when you dump it in the soil, air, whatever, start interacting with it. Turns out that the method by which this material releases the nutrients to the plants is that it reacts with carbonic acid that's coming out of the rainwater, that is basically CO2 from the atmosphere. So you can calculate that you can take this material and transport it from Greenland to just about anywhere in the world, and in the end, it'll probably have taken up more carbon dioxide from the air than you spent on transporting it. So again, it seems like a complete wonder material. And I'll come back here on stage after Andreas have told you how it works. Maybe why it not work, I hope not. But anyway, and then I'll discuss some of the implications about it from that point of view. But I think we should have Andreas take over and give you some real science now.
Okay, thank you, Minik. So I'm Andreas de Neergaard. I'm from the social science faculty. Recently, until 1 month ago, I was a professor of tropical plant production in the plant nutrition and environmental science group. I want to do two things in the next 20 minutes. The first one is to take you through the head of a plant nutritionist when you get a phone call from a geologist who says that he has a solution to world poverty, global food shortages, and just life in general. So that will be a quick flow of consciousness. And secondly, I want to show you some of the experiments that we've been doing at our lab by some of the people who are here today, and not by me, so I should give the credit to these guys as we go through that. So that's the idea. So what happens, this crazy person calls not me, but one of my colleagues 2.5 years ago, and my colleague says, this is never going to work. I'm going to direct you to my friend Andreas, who always says yes. So Minik was directed to me, and surely I said, yes, let's do something about this. So that worked well. So I'm going to take you through what happens in the head of a plant nutrition expert when this comes to you. So the man is talking about something, a rock basically, which is lying somewhere in Greenland, and he says if you put this into your soil, your plants will grow better. And I don't know what your intuitive instincts tells you, but I can tell you that if you put this into a plant or into the soil, absolutely nothing is going to happen for a while. So the difference is, of course, that what we're talking about is not this stuff, but it's something like this, which, as Minik says, is very fine. Minik didn't dare to bring a fine powder to Christiania tonight, but I did. So it's lying here, and this is the stuff we're talking about. Okay. So this is what we're going to put. We're going to put it on soils like this. You can't see the beautiful red oxysol from Swaziland, but this is what we're talking about. And he wants to make a business out of it. So I imagine if you put it into a beautiful plastic bag, you can sell it at $50 a kilo to people like your mother or someone like that to use on her balcony somewhere in central Copenhagen. But we're talking about moving this to tropical regions where it's actually going to be profitable for smallholders who are extremely limited in their credit, in their purchasing power, and so on. So that's difficult. Okay, what do plants need? This is the first thing you start thinking. Plants need 17 essential nutrients, 14 of them are mineral-based. We have the macronutrients, we have the micronutrients, and we have oxygen, carbon, and hydrogen. You wonder, are these nutrients actually present in the material that we are talking about? We know that these essential plant nutrients are needed in very different quantities, okay? So you need 1,000,000 times more nitrogen compared to molybdenum or nickel if you are a plant. And so as a plant scientist, as a plant nutritionist, your main focus will be on these nutrients down here, so nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, and sulfur. These are the main fertilizer that we use in global plant production or in global agriculture. Okay, so what can we expect to find in something like this or something like this? We can expect to find something which is kind of resembling the average surface crust of the soil. And this looks very different, okay? A lot of oxygen, a lot of silicium, a lot of aluminium, stuff which is useless from a plant production point of view. And all the stuff we need, phosphorus, nitrogen, iron, manganese, potassium, are these tiny slices of the cake. So there is some imbalance, but this is what plants experience every day. They want to look like this, and the substrate they are growing from looks like this. So that's a challenge. Okay. So what's the composition of our Greenlandic rock flour? It looks pretty much like the average crust. And so we look to this and we can see, okay, phosphorus, which is a likely nutrient deficient or limiting nutrient, very little. Potassium, not too much. Manganese, not very much. Sulfur, hardly anything. So, and a lot of silicium, a lot of aluminium, which is completely irrelevant from a plant production point of view, and then all the micronutrients. So it's not kind of the stuff that makes your fertilizer companies say, hey, we need a lot of this and we're going to bag it and sell it very expensively. It's kind of, and this is why my colleague said, call Andreas. Okay? So we have, of course, a very, very strong imperative. You guys are young people. This is the challenge of your generation, to make enough food for the next generation. This was a challenge for every generation since Malthus developed the idea of linear growth and exponential growth of populations. The problem is that we're running short of all kinds of resources, and here is just an example of the land, so we cannot expand agriculture anymore. It's been stable for the past 25 years, something like that, and a lot of the other resources we use for crop production are kind of running out. So the uneven distribution of growth and prosperity, as Minik said, is obvious, and here we see where the agriculture is expanding. Agriculture is expanding all the places in the world where we have essential environmental, wildlife values. So these are all the vulnerable places on the Earth, which are also essential for our carbon balance. This is where agriculture is expanding right now. So if we can halt agricultural expansion, this is really quite significant, also from a climate change point of view. Where is the yield gap? Where can we produce more food for the people? We can produce more food in the place where we are producing too little, which is all the developing countries here, here, a little bit over here, and a lot over here, okay? So there is no point in deregulating fertilizer use in Denmark unless you are in the pocket of the agricultural industry, because from a food production point of view, it is completely useless. It's not going to change anything. We need to develop food production where the food is needed and where the production is low at the moment. What is limiting food production in these areas? This is mainly nutrients or nutrients and water together, okay? So all these areas which were pale on the former slide is where we need more nutrients, so exactly what Minik said before. So the model that he's talking about makes sense. We need to bring nutrients to these parts of the world in order to create wealth, in order to create global food security. I can breathe now, right? Okay. Even if we are not too worried about these issues, most of the food subsistence production is made by smallholders themselves, so they are an essential part of the global food production system. We cannot just feed the people in Uganda by producing more in Denmark because they cannot afford to buy it, so we need to increase their production. And these guys are extremely dangerous. Small-scale agriculture is contributing 40% of the deforestation in the world. So don't worry too much about McDonald's. You should worry about poor people cutting down forests, because they are the main drivers of these land use changes, which are important in the climate change scenario. Okay. So let's go back to the nutrients. I'm still in the head of me the first half hour after speaking to Minik. Phosphorus deficiency, widespread across the tropics, so let's hope that there is phosphorus in this stuff and it can be released. Potassium deficiency, widespread across the tropics, the areas we want to target, so let's hope there's potassium in this material. So this is more or less what we were thinking so far. If you look at the main fertilizer sources in the world, nitrogen, we know there's nothing of that in the material, a lot of potassium, a lot of phosphorus, a lot of potassium, increasing globally. So if we can target these two nutrients, we may have a product which is actually useful. So that's where we start to work. Okay. So, back to the rock. Is this thing going to work? Obviously not. Back to the Greenlandic rock dust. Is it going to work? Maybe. So why might it work? Because it's a very, very fine particle. So Minik talks about the particle size distribution. So we can see here the peak is around 2 to 5, or over here, 1 to 3 microns, and then a second peak here around 25 or something like that, okay? So it's true what Minik says. If you rub this between your fingers and your fingers are wet, you cannot feel the material at all. It feels like soap, okay? It's very fine. I only have this one, but you can have it if you want, okay? There is 100 million tons in Greenland if you want to. So we're asking ourselves, which plant nutrients are released? How fast are they released? Can we bind nutrients to the surface and, for example, load it with nitrogen because there's no nitrogen? Can we lime low pH soils? Can we use it to increase the soil structure so that it holds more water? Can we use it to release the nutrients which are already in the soil? And so these things. Can we accelerate the nutrient release by growing it together with plants which are aggressive in attacking the soil and extracting nutrients? And are there big differences between the different glacier deposits? So these are the questions we started to ask when we started this work with Minik. Okay. So I'm going to take you through 2 or 3 experiments. You can't see a thing unless you are sitting on the second row here. So too bad for the rest of you guys. I'm going to talk you through it. So we grow plants in severely nutrient-depleted soils. We add different control treatments, and we add Greenlandic rock flour together with or without other nutrients. You don't have to read the slides, you can just listen to what I'm saying, okay? So, if you have a nutrient-poor soil and you add Greenlandic rock flour, absolutely nothing happens. This is without, this is with. Okay, it's not gonna work. Because there's no nitrogen in the system, if you add nitrogen on top, you can see that you get here an increase. It doesn't look tremendous, but actually this is a 37% increase in the plant production when you add the Greenlandic rock flour and a nitrogen source. Okay, 37%. Go tell a farmer, if you add this stuff and urea, you get 37% increase in your yield. These guys are looking at 2 or 4 or 6% yield increase normally. So this is a lot. Okay, it's not in the field, it's not in Brazil, but still, it's a lot. Okay. So this was with maize. Maize doesn't draw nitrogen from the atmosphere, so we said, let's go for the best plant in the world in terms of extracting nutrients from the soil. And the best plant to do that is white lupine. So white lupine is an extraordinary plant. It develops what is called cluster roots as a response to phosphorus deficiency, also potassium deficiency. So this is a root which is well supplied with nutrients. When you remove the phosphorus from the system, it develops these very dense root systems. It releases organic acids which attack the soil, dissolves nutrients. It releases siderophores which moves phosphate to the soil surface, and it also decreases the pH. So this is a soil that can virtually bleach, or sorry, a plant that can bleach the soil and draw out the nutrients. Okay, so looks like this in the lab, and thanks to Beatrice for doing the work. So we grow them in the same soil for 8 weeks, so still a short-term trial, 2.5% rock flour, different controls, okay? We get 50% increase in the plant biomass, okay? So, I don't know if you guys have plants in your home, but I want to impress you. You grow a plant, you stick this into the soil, and you get 50% growth increase. Okay, not this one, this one. Okay, it's crazy. So at this point, the rest of my lab started to look to Beatrice and me and say, are you guys mixing the treatments or cheating or what's going on? So it is absurd to imagine that infertile, very small mountains, when you add them to soil, suddenly they start to release nutrients. But they do. Because I've been lying somewhere in the cold in Greenland, in Minik's backyard, and when you bring them to a hot, humid system with a root, which is releasing acids and CO2, they start to react. And they've been sitting there for a while, not reacting at all. 50% increase in the plant biomass in a very short-term experiment. When Minik called, we thought, okay, he's a geologist. So within the next 10,000 years, this is going to work super well. Just like the Danish soils are really fertile because they were fertilized 10,000 years ago by the glaciers. So when we hired Clara as a PhD, she said, okay, I have a 3-year project, 10,000 years. What am I going to publish the first couple of years? We said, don't worry, it's going to work. Okay, 50% increase. When we look at the phosphorus level in the soil, we can see that there's generally a little bit more phosphate available when we add the Greenlandic rock flour compared to the control treatments. Not a lot, but a little bit crazy because there's hardly any phosphate in the material. And when we look at the phosphorus and potassium uptake in the plant, you can see again here, so a significant increase in the phosphorus uptake and a significant increase in the potassium uptake. So this stuff is increasing the plant's availability or access to these nutrients. Okay, I think we're running out of time, Minik, right? What is the time? Okay, another 10,000 years. Right, so we were interested in comparing the different sediments because the magic stuff which is working so far is excavated from a site which is just beneath the summer house of Minik's brother. And so he was curious to how much we really needed of this stuff because his summer house was starting to kind of lean over. So what would be really great was if we could sail into the bottom of the fjord and then just from a coaster pump this stuff into the boat and then sail away. This would be the great way to do it as opposed to drive up with some caterpillar and excavate it from somewhere else. So we did just a simple experiment, and this is ongoing at the moment, comparing the different substrates, and we can see that the stuff from Minik's summer house is excellent, and the stuff from over here is less excellent. I don't know if it's because your brother goes out and pees every morning. Actually, I thought about that, Minik. Does he pee over the veranda and then go back to bed? Maybe that's why it's weird. Okay, I don't know, or maybe throws out the scraps, whatever. So there is an issue about the deposit quality, which we're not certain about, but there is a salinity issue if you want to really extract large amounts from these riverbeds or from the ocean, the bottom of the fjord. There is a salinity issue that we need to solve, and we're working pretty hard on that at the moment right now. Okay, final experiment, which is run by Clara. Where is Clara? Over there. She's a 10,000-year PhD student. So here we said we need to understand better which nutrient is really limiting, so we wanted to isolate the effects of phosphorus, potassium, manganese, and sulfur, and we set up a nice trial that you can discuss with Clara when you have drinks in a few moments, where we have a double pot system, and we can isolate the effects of these different nutrients, but still maintain good plant growth, so that's the idea. It looks like this in the greenhouse. And we did it in a soil, and we did it in a pure sand, because we were also interested whether the Greenlandic rock flour could somehow interact with the soil and make the nutrients in the soil more mobile. So it was kind of a, let's say, exchange deal between some nutrients released from the rock flour, which would then mobilize nutrients in the soil. So we made this comparison. And basically we can see, you don't have to understand it, but anyway, a small growth increase when we add in the absence of potassium. So this is a potassium fertilization effect when all other nutrients are supplied in abundance. So there is a small potassium effect in the soil. When we go to the sand, which is much less fertile, obviously, we have an extremely large, so a 4 times yield increase in this case, when we grow the plants in a low fertile media. So there is clearly a significant potassium release from this material. If we go for manganese, we can see the same, so we have more or less a doubling of the plant growth. And okay, by now you're kind of buying the idea that this stuff works, but I want to remind you that we are taking this rock and making it very small and adding it to soil, which is fertile, and suddenly the plants grow better. It is absurd, but this is true. Okay, so more or less doubling with the sand and the manganese, and when we go back into the soil, we can see that the manganese. So we need kind of a low background of nutrients for this stuff to work. We need a low fertile soil. If the soil is fertile, we cannot really make it work. If the soil is infertile or in a sandy system, we can have really significant potassium and phosphorus release. So how much is released? So within these 2 months of plant growth, we have about 4 to 6% of the potassium in the material, which is then recaptured in the plants. So this is the next question. How long does it go on? Do we have 5% of the potassium is released, and then the 95% is going to sit there for another 10,000 years? We're going to have a continuous release, 5% every 2 months for the rest of our PhD. In that case, it's really a quite remarkable material. So that's our next question right now. What is going to happen on slightly longer term trials? So we're setting up field trials in Brazil. We're considering field trials in Denmark next year. Yes. And we're trying to set up longer term trials in Denmark at the moment. Okay. So what do we know? We know that it has no nitrogen. If we grow it with a lupine, or if we supply nitrogen to the system, it works well. It supplies potassium, it supplies some manganese, and under some conditions, it also supplies phosphorus to the system. We have not looked specifically to the micronutrients, but there's another avenue to go there. Okay, so what do we do now? We try to look to the longer term release to see if we can continue this release. We start to look if we can keep manipulating the release from the material by using these aggressive stimulants like the lupine or other biological or compost or whatever, some kind of activity in the soil. And we want to compare the different substrates, the different deposits, to see if we really have this salinity problem always, or whether we can find abundant deposits which are not challenged by the salinity issue. Okay, Minik, back to you.
Andreas, so I think this was a very worthwhile phone call, despite the fact that I got a very skeptical person first. I have to say that before I did that, I actually wrote a letter to the grand old man of tropical agriculture called Sanchez or whatever, and he knows everything about tropical soils, and I wrote to him, I have this wonderful idea that I would really like to test, and and I got back a very brief letter that says, it won't work. Okay, so that's when I said, okay, let's aim a little bit lower, not to offend anybody, but then I called the Danish Ag School, and they took the bait, and it turned out that that was a very good idea on their part. But anyway, what are the perspectives of this, if it really works? And it seems to be starting to show that, at least we have, till now, through the research we've done, we haven't had any showstoppers. There's nothing that tells us that it's not worthwhile continuing. There's nothing that tells us that it doesn't work, or that there are some barriers to bump into. But I think it's maybe also interesting to, of course, analyze a little bit why would we be interested in having it work. And one part is, of course, the thing about helping distribute wealth more evenly on Earth and help feed more hungry people than we will be able to from the agricultural land right now. But I think there's a whole list of topics that are really important. And one thing that I think that Andreas was also alluding to is the fact that since the tropics have no nutrients in the soil, what do poor farmers do if they need to grow something anyway? They look around and they spot one thing that contains a little bit of nutrients, and that is the trees that grow in the forest. What we see here is a satellite image of Indonesia, and you can see everything to the right-hand side of this slide is covered in smoke and little spots and whatever. What you see here is the boundary of the tropical rainforest in Indonesia. And every year it moves that direction, unfortunately, rather than that direction. And that is because the way you can grow a tropical soil is you burn the trees that are growing there, have been growing there for thousands and thousands of years, because they grow in a closed system where all the nutrients are being recycled within the rainforest continuously. But there's no net productivity of biomass in that rainforest. So what you do is that you throw a match as a part of the rainforest, burn it down, and you release the nutrients that are in the trees. So for the next year, maybe the next 2 years, you can grow something. Then you have extracted all the nutrients from that was in the trees. You've taken it off the field because you take the crops and you sell them at the market. They take it into the city, whatever. People eat the crops. They go to the bathroom, pull the thing, the nutrients out in the ocean, and never return to the field again. So how do you solve that problem? Of course, you just next year you burn another part of the rainforest, and that is one of the main reasons for deforestation of the global rainforests. So I think that is one thing where actually we could do something, and that is it's probably much, much, much easier to go around with this little thing on the field that you have already created than to take the chainsaw and cut another part of the rainforest and start burning and start turn it into farmland. So I think there's a lot of things we can do. But another thing from my own perspective, being from Greenland, is of course that I will save on my daughter's rubber boots if we get rid of this stuff. But the other part is, of course, that again, Greenland and the Arctic also has a great need to be recognized in the world. And I think everybody, we all need to somehow be helpful and recognized and of use and whatever. So I think that one thing that would be really, really nice outcome is that if Greenland can become relevant to the world, and at the same time we can help alleviate some of the gigantic problems that we are facing all over the place. So I think with that I will maybe try to be a little bit kind of, I don't know what you say, but I think that it's really important with this kind of research that we are doing to realize that we are not facing in our future, we are not facing a destiny that's just happening. Everything that is happening in the future is a function of decisions we make right now today. And I think that we should realize that climate change and all kinds of disasters that are pending are not happening just out of nothing, but also many of these things can be changed, or at least we can maybe lessen some of the negative consequences. So therefore, I think it's really important that we look around and we try to figure out how can we take various global problems, mate them to one another, and make them go away. So this is one where we can help Greenland get a new industry that is nice and sustainable and everything else, doesn't require any chemistry or anything else that might be bothersome. And at the same time, we can maybe stop or limit deforestation. We can get better income to people in poor countries and so forth. But I think in all of this, we should also, of course, remember that all our research in natural sciences is about the beauty of nature. So I think that we should, in the end, say that we cannot afford to lose all this beauty. And that's why we should do all this work to basically preserve as much of the beautiful planet as we can by working together. So thank you.